Now that we've reviewed the Intel i9-10980XE 18-core CPU and the Threadripper 3970X, it's time to review the smaller alternative in AMD's 24-core Threadripper 3960X CPU. The 3960X is supposed to be the more affordable of the two Threadripper parts launching today, priced at $1,400 rather than $2,000. It ends up between the 10980XE at $1,000 and the 3970X in pricing. We'll be focusing almost entirely on Adobe Premiere, Blender, Photoshop, compression and decompression, and some gaming tests in today's 3960X review. Before that, this video is brought to you by the Lian Li LANCool 2 mid-tower case. The Lian Li LANCool 2 is an affordable ATX chassis that's built with unique features like flippable panels for easy access hard drive cages and hot swap bays, cableless RGB contact pins in the front for a cleaner assembly, and rear shrouds for cable management and cable concealment. The LANCool 2 is a unique case at an affordable price point. Learn more at the link in the description below. First of all, if you haven't seen the 3970X review we did, you should watch that one in addition to this, maybe first. It's got a lot of information that we're not going to go back over here, just be repeating ourselves on that, but we wanted to break the CPUs out because there was enough to analyze with the 3970X, looked at thermals and power in greater depth, and all of the workstation and production benchmarks that we wanted to give it its own dedicated video, so we had enough airtime, basically capping at 30 minutes, had enough airtime to cover both parts and the depth that they each deserve. So this one's going to be a bit quicker than the 3970X review. We're focusing pretty much on production numbers with some gaming splash in there, if you care about that. And the reminder on a few things we went through in the 3970X video: one, this is not a gaming CPU. The 10980XE is not really a gaming CPU either. The question, as stated before, is not, are they the best at playing games? It's, do they play games well enough that you don't have to turn cores and features off? So that's all we really care about there. And if you're building a gaming machine and that's the only thing you want to build, and what you did was, it's Black Friday season, you went to Newegg, sorted by most expensive because you have the budget, and you're like, well, I'll just buy that one. Don't do that. You should buy something cheaper because it'll be better for those gaming-only builds. But if you are interested in production and what the marketing agencies of the world have dubbed creator or creation stuff, like what we do, I guess, for work, then definitely check out the Threadripper and, well, the Threadripper and the 3950X parts, which is baby Threadripper at this point. 10980XE, our verdict was more or less, even if Threadripper 3 doesn't exist, it's not really worth it. It's very hard to justify. The 3950X kind of embarrasses it, and it's cheaper in a lot of instances. Anyway, other reminders: the 3960X is 4 6-core chiplets instead of 4 8-core chiplets, which is what the 3970X is. There will be a 64-core Threadripper part coming out separately. That is almost certainly going to be on a different platform. It'll be SWRX 8. From what we understand now, this part is rumor, but 64-core existing is real for sure. But our understanding is that it should be an 8-channel for the 64-core option. We don't know anything about the motherboards really for that. We do know about these motherboards though. STRX 40 would be the platform. TRX 40 is the chipset. It is the same socket mounting holes as Threadripper 2 and 1, so you can use the same coolers, although you should don't use like the Noctua 120s for the 32-core part. You'll have a bad time. And X399 is not intercompatible. Can't use these CPUs on those boards, can't use those CPUs on these boards. And that should kind of get us up to date on most of this. Power limitations default to 280 watt PPT, 300 amp EDC, 215 amp TDC, discussed in the power video for AMD TDP explanation we did. And that should cover us. Let's get into the review numbers for the 3960X, and then we'll talk about if this thing's actually worth it. We'll start our production workload tests with 2 Adobe Premiere charts and our 1080p RNG ENG shoot on a show floor of a convention. The 3960X completes the render in about 2.5 minutes, which has it roughly tied with the 3970X stock. In case that seems counterintuitive, remember that Premiere doesn't fully utilize or evenly utilize all 32 cores of the 3970X, so it benefits from the 100 megahertz higher base clock of the 3960X. This puts the $1,400 3960X about on par with the $2,000 3970X in this particular render workload, although mileage will vary for different projects and different project types. We'll try a different one in a moment. But first, the 10980XE stock CPU runs at about 2.7 to 2.8 minutes for the render time, allowing the 3960X a lead of about 7% time reduction. As for the 3950X stock CPU, the baby Threadripper 16-core manages a render completion time of 2.8 minutes, establishing promising value given the similar performance to the TR3000 series. The hierarchy moves a little bit with our 4K 60 longer A-roll B-roll project. For this one, AME completes the render in 6 minutes on the 3960X, which is equivalent to the 4.9 GHz 10980XE at over 500 watts. The 3970X is technically slightly slower, again an artifact of the 100 MHz delta and being sort of within test variants as well. The 10980XE stock CPU requires 7.3 minutes to render, resulting in an 18% render time reduction on the 3960X versus the 10980XE stock. The 3950X, for reference, runs comparatively slower in this render than the previous one at 8.2 minutes required. That means the 3960X offers a 27% render time reduction over the 3950X stock in this workload. Adobe Photoshop tends to prefer frequency, as we keep saying, but has been showing more favor toward the AMD 3000 series parts than previously expected. For our aggregate result, the 3960X stock CPU scores 1086 points, which is an abstraction from the base metric of time to complete filters, transforms, and other effects. The 1086 scoring has it roughly equivalent to the 3970X stock CPU, within error, and also within error of the 9980XE 4.5 GHz CPU. Still in this chart, the 9900K is a leader, challenged only by the overclocked 10980XE, and until Photoshop changes, it's probably going to stay the same. Blender offers a more linear scaling with threads, seen as the cycles renderer spawns new tiles for each thread and allows them to process independently, so one thread isn't going to be waiting on the other. For the GN Monkey Head render, the 3960X completes the render in 6.9 minutes, which means that the 3970X offers a render time reduction of about 19% in exchange for 43% more money. That's well worth it for users who explicitly need the rendering power to, for example, use in their money-making work machines, but it's probably not worth it for more hobbyist users. The 3950X is still a good option at 10 minutes render time as well, although the 3960X completes the render in 32% less time than the 3950X. Intel doesn't appear until the 4th rank in the chart, where its $1,000 10980XE manages an 8-minute result at 4.9 GHz all-core. This is good positioning for Intel with an overclock, especially compared to only the other Intel 18-core results, but it's flanked by an HEDT value product at $750, that's the 3950X, and an HEDT direct competitor, sort of, at $1,400, the 3960X. For the GN logo render, the stack shuffles to push Intel further down on the charts, with AMD now holding the top 4 slots in the stack, ignoring the liquid nitrogen-cooled 3950X at 5.2 GHz. Obviously doesn't really count. The 3960X finishes the render in 8.1 minutes, which is notably faster than the 2990WX previously. This isn't from AMD's self-promoted topological changes and memory subsystem change. Those are important, and they do surface as benefits in other applications, but this is more, in this test, from the increase in base frequency as multiplied across 24 cores. As stated in our 3970X review, frequency increases help, obviously, but they really start to show up in purely thread-based applications like Blender's Cycles renderer. For example, a 100 MHz increase in a less thread-packed workload like Photoshop might fail to materialize as much of an improvement. But in Blender, you've now got 24 cores running at 100% load that have all increased their capabilities, which does have an immediate and noticeable impact to scoring. This render isn't particularly memory intensive anyway, and it doesn't do anything with PCIe, so that leaves frequency scaling adding up to across a lot of threads, adding up to the benefit. As for the 3970X, that's 21% faster in rendering this image than the 3960X, in case you were wondering. We see some of that behavior continue with 7-zip decompression, where the 3960X outperforms the 2990WX by 17%, a marked improvement over last generation while running a lower core count. The 3970X still offers a 39% improvement over the 3960X though, which is more noteworthy than in some of the other tests. Users who deal with decompression tasks primarily, particularly those who get stuck in their pipeline on decompression, may want to seriously consider the 3970X expense, particularly if for business purposes. As for the 3950X stock CPU and its 186K MIPS, the 16-core AM4 chip is able to achieve 73% of the 3960X's performance at just 54% of the price. Although StatMath has a funny way of diluting the base information, it's still a compelling value for this work. You'd lose out on extra memory channels and capacity, which is potentially a non-starter for some users, But if you don't worry about those things, then it's good value that accomplishes much the same work for a lot cheaper. For compression, the 3960X ends up roughly tied with the 3970X. In the 3970X review, when we said we think that these CPUs might be bottlenecking on some application level behavior, this is why we said it. The base and boost behaviors could describe some of this positioning, although it also looks like we're becoming bound elsewhere in the system. We're not too sure how useful this data is between the two parts, specifically these two parts, and we won't really find out until we have another CPU that is definitively better than both at this test, as we'll need something with a known gap to determine if these match from external bottlenecking or simply from application level limitations or from how the CPUs behave. V-Ray is our last production application prior to power and gaming numbers. The Chaos Group application is another thread-dependent renderer, predictably placing the 3960X between the 3950X and 3970X. The 2990WX is notably outperformed by the newer 24-core CPU, underscoring that, at least up through Zen 2, AMD still had massive gains available from architectural refinement. The 10980XE at 4.9 GHz can't quite keep up with the $1,400 part, although it's getting close while only affording a 7% render time reduction to the 24-core CPU. The 3970X stock CPU runs about 20% faster than the 60X, not scaling as persuasively as it did in some of the other tests. We'll look at a few games now, but we should first provide the same reminder that we did in the 3970X review. These are not gaming parts. The goal of testing these games isn't to see if they're the best at them, because they won't be, but rather to see if they're good enough to sustain reasonably playable frame rates without scheduling or latency detriments that make them bad. Starting with Hitman 2 and DirectX 12, first at 1080p and then 1440p, the 3960X manages performance that's simply okay. That's fine though, because the alternative for an HEDT CPU with a core count this high is typically bad. Those are the two options, okay or bad. It's not likely that you'll get best for a part like this in these types of workloads. The 3960X maintains reasonably playable gameplay and a steady enough frame time consistency that you shouldn't have to disable any cores to play at least this game between actual workstation tasks. The 3960X ends up just ahead of the 3900X 121 FPS average, ranked about 1.5% ahead, and ends up being functionally tied with the 3970X. As stated amply before, if you're building a machine that will be primarily for gaming, just buy a 9900K. Or if you want AMD, a 3900X. Maybe a 3950X for people with medium workstation saturation in between the gaming. But don't buy this for that use case. The 9900K is still the chart topper in nearly all of our gaming tests, and we never thought that would change here, and hopefully you didn't either. At 1440p, the higher ranking parts become GPU bound, and the delta from top to 3960X diminishes greatly as the performance remains predictably the same for the parts that were CPU bound, just like they were at 1080p. So nothing really new here. Assassin's Creed at 1080p posts unsurprisingly similar performance results with the 3960X with an error of the 3950X stock CPU and near the 3970X stock CPU. There's no meaningful difference between these, and we lack the test resolution to declare a victor between the 3950X and 3960X, although it also just doesn't matter at all. 1440p doesn't change much other than to show that the stack still has the 3950X, 60X, and 70X all basically at the same average frame rate. We're not in enough of a GPU bind to further restrict these, but they're topping out anyway. The takeaway is that the 3960X is completely fine for at least these initial games. As expected, it's not the best, but it never was going to be. Shadow of the Tomb Raider at 1080p next has our 3960X at 141 FPS average, which ranks it as roughly equivalent to the 3700X, even down to the lows. The 3970X ranks about 3.6% ahead of the 3960X, but this is a completely unnoticeable change for users, and both CPUs ultimately offer fine performance for gaming between work. Civilization 6 gives us turn time benchmarks rather than FPS benchmarks to provide a different perspective for CPU performance in gaming. More of this discussion can be found in the 3970X review, but for this one, the 3960X completes its turns in about 31.2 seconds, with the 3950X at 31.4 seconds, and the 3970X also at 31.4 seconds. The error in this bench is nearly zero, so these differences likely emerge from the base clock change. The 10980XE has a good uptick in performance from its overclock, sitting at the top of the chart at 28.2 seconds, but value is obviously still in favor of the 9900K if you're considering a top part on this chart anyway. Finally, let's look at an old game for a better understanding of if older engine thread management poses issues for higher core count CPUs. With GTA 5 at 1080p, the 3960X runs at 103 FPS average, with frame time consistency perfectly in line with its flanking results. The 3960X ends up about tied with the 10980XE stock CPU, but also with the R5 3600. The latter helps illustrate that, once again, there are better options for only gaming builds, but the 3960X isn't a stuttering mess, and that's a change that's happened over the last 1.5 generations for AMD, so it looks good overall. All right, so as stated, a bit easier for this one because honestly, we just came off of endless Stadia benchmarking, a couple of 24-hour days in there, and then also 3 CPU reviews, plus all of the other content that we have to do for this season. So, is this CPU worth it? Well, first of all, the 3970X is quite a bit more expensive, so you might not even be looking at A versus B because it might be out of budget. But if you're interested in it, check out our 3970X review. You get some additional information to what you get here, like thermals and power, where we show the core-to-core deltas, the hottest CCDs, and how distant those are from the coolest CCDs. And that number, or that CCD behavior, will change based on the CPU because all of the SMUs are different, and the chiplets are all different silicon fitness and quality. But if you're interested in that type of information, check that review out as well. 3960X. So the question is really of 4 CPUs, which are the ones that you should be considering, and it's 10980XE, 3950X, cheaper, 3960X, 3970X. So let's start at the bottom. 3950X is extremely competitive. It frankly embarrasses the 10980XE a lot of the time. Not always, but quite a bit of the time in the types of applications you would buy either CPU for, from what we've benchmarked anyway. And there's some benefit to the 10980XE in that it is still really fun to overclock. If you're an overclocking enthusiast, you might enjoy that platform, but that's a really small audience, and we don't really like to review CPUs based on that. Now, we're part of that audience, and we've got the liquid nitrogen to prove it these days, but that's not how we review CPUs. So something to keep note of, but not something to base your purchase off of unless you're a competitive overclocker and you can't afford a 3175X or something. And also, to be frank, the Threadripper and high-end AMD parts have gotten really fun to overclock as well. They're a bit more limited in the number that you get out of them. The frequency doesn't go as high, but relative to itself, it still goes pretty damn high. So even that bastion, Intel is beginning to lose with this generation of AMD parts. So we can kind of rule out the 10980XE for the most part, which is abnormal. It's not something we're used to, because traditionally, HEDT, even with Threadripper 1 and Threadripper 2, Intel's had some really strong arguments still in HEDT, and those were typically things like Adobe applications and limited thread workloads, because they overclock well, they're pretty fast out of box, but they haven't improved enough with this gen to keep that same positioning on the charts. So what we're looking at right now is high-end systems that do the types of things we talked about today. If your gaming is not your only concern and you primarily do workstation stuff with some gaming between, all of these CPUs are fine. None of them, we didn't run into any major issues with frame time consistency, and if you do, you can turn some cores off. Not a great solution, but solution nonetheless. And for production, we're still really liking the 3950X at the price point. It's extremely good value. If that's not good enough for you, you make money on the work you do, then Threadripper is definitely worth considering, because you spend more on it now. But if you have a pipeline that is so jammed with work from clients that your limitation is actually getting it rendered fast enough or getting previews out fast enough for the clients to see before you commit to the final work you're doing, whatever that may be, then the 3960X is a good split for not quite the budget of a 3970X, and you want more of the 3950X. 3970X has kind of become a flagship, and we really need to revisit the 28-core Intel CPU at this point to see how that does versus the 3970X. But anyway, we don't really have any problems with the 2 new Threadripper CPUs. We had some issues with the motherboards and with booting and stuff like that, but we were able to resolve them all before launch. The final BIOS versions should have resolved a lot of those, and we can't really review the product negatively based on a pre-release BIOS. The new ones seem to fix the issues we had anyway. So we don't have any major issues with it. And really, you're kind of fine picking these based on your budget. But it comes down to if you do a lot of tile-based rendering, if you do things that are totally thread dependent, if you do decompression regularly, compression less so, but decompression, then all these are good use cases for Threadripper 3. If you are more of a Photoshop, really heavy Photoshop user, and you don't do much else, or you work with applications that do not heavily load all of the threads or consistently schedule all of the threads to be fully tasked, then the Intel parts are probably worth considering, and hopefully we have a benchmark for you, but if not, go look into others for your application because it may matter there. But anyway, that's going to be it for this one. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more. We have a lot of stuff coming up this week. We're going to be very tired from it, and you can go to store.gamersnexus.net to pick up our mod mats, which are in stock and shipping now, and we're still doing the work with the charity Eden Reforestation projects where we're planting 10 trees per item sold on store.gamersnexus.net this month. And you can also go to patreon.com/gamersnexus. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time.